All right, let's dive into one of the most epic sagas in all of history. We're talking about a story of raw ambition, fierce loyalty, and shocking betrayal that literally rose from the ashes of a fallen empire. Get ready, because we're exploring the legendary era of the Three Kingdoms.
So here's the big question. How does a massive, world-leading empire just shatter? And not just into pieces, but into three rival kingdoms, each led by these incredible, larger-than-life figures. It's this amazing story of total collapse and incredible creation, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack. Okay, so to really get what's happening, we've got to rewind a bit. For 400 years, the Han Dynasty was basically the center of the known world. I mean, we're talking about a true symbol of power and stability. But, nothing lasts forever. By the late 2nd century, the whole thing was starting to crack. You had corruption, famine, rebellion, all of it just eating away at the foundation, leaving this massive, dangerous power vacuum. And you know what's crazy? The whole thing fell apart so fast. It all kicks off in 184 with this huge uprising, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which just rattles the empire to its core. A few years after that, this tyrant warlord Dong Zhuo marches in, seizes the capital, and basically holds the child emperor hostage. A bunch of other warlords team up to fight him, but that alliance just explodes. They immediately start fighting each other. It's a total free-for-all. And just like that, by 220, the Han Dynasty is officially over, gone. China is broken, and its future is completely up for grabs.
So out of all this absolute chaos, three truly incredible leaders start to rise above the rest. And these guys weren't your average warlords. No, they were visionaries. Each one had a completely different idea for what China should become, and their ambitions were on a collision course.
First up, you've got Cao Cao. This guy was the ultimate pragmatist. Brilliant, yes, but also completely ruthless. He didn't care about tradition at all. I mean, in an age where your family name was everything, he famously said he'd hire anybody who was talented, no matter where they came from. That was a game changer. He grabs the emperor, takes control of the northern heartland, and boom, he's the most powerful man in the country.
And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Liu Bei. He had a distant claim to the royal bloodline, so he presented himself as the good guy, the rightful heir fighting to restore the dynasty. His whole platform wasn't about raw power, it was about morality, virtue, and justice, and people flocked to him. He built this incredibly loyal following who really believed in his noble cause.
Rounding out our trio is Sun Quan, the survivor, the master of the South. He was smart. He inherited a solid base of power from his father and brother. And his goal wasn't to go out and conquer everyone right away. Nope, his ambition was all about defense. He wanted to build a fortress in the South, a stronghold so powerful that nobody could touch him.
Okay, so we've met the players. Now let's dive into the kingdoms they built, starting with the big one, the northern powerhouse, Wei. This place was forged by Cao Cao's pure ambition, and it was, without a doubt, the dominant force of the time.
So, what made Wei so scary? Well, they pretty much had it all. Cao Cao's pragmatism meant they ran things efficiently. They controlled the north, the original Han heartland, which meant they had the most people and the most resources. Plus, by controlling the emperor, they could claim to be the legitimate government. And to top it all off, they had the biggest army and the strongest economy. Yeah, Wei was absolutely the one to beat.
But here's where it gets interesting. Wei's biggest rival wasn't some other kingdom with a huge army and tons of money. No, it was a kingdom built entirely on an idea. So let's turn our attention to the ultimate underdog, Shu.
Shu's power, you see, came from a totally different place. Liu Bei used his family connection to the old emperors to say, hey, I'm the real successor here. His strength wasn't a giant army or a huge territory, it was his moral authority. His whole philosophy was based on this idea of virtue and benevolence, known as Ren. And it was like a magnet. It pulled in some of the smartest people around, including the legendary master strategist, Zhuge Liang.
And that brings us to our third major power. This was the kingdom that decided to play the long game, relying on patience and incredible defensive strength. Let's talk about the southern stronghold, Wu. If you had to describe Sun Quan's kingdom of Wu in one word, it would be endurance. Just look at their territory. It was protected by the gigantic Yangtze River. This thing was like a natural supermoat. Northern armies, which were mostly infantry and cavalry, just couldn't deal with it. So while Wei had the best army on land, Wu had by far the best navy. It made their kingdom a fortress. Their whole strategy was just brilliant in its simplicity. Stay stable, build up your strength, and just wait. Outlast everybody.
So what does all this lead to? Well, here's the crucial part. It leads to a stalemate. A total standoff. Think about it. Wei is too powerful to be conquered head-on.
Shu has the moral high ground and these genius strategists, and Wu has a defense that's basically unbreakable. None of them can land that final knockout punch, and this creates what we call the tripartite division, this incredible, tense balance of power that's going to define China for decades.
And this chart just lays it all out so perfectly, doesn't it? You've got Wei the pragmatist, with their massive land army, controlling the north by holding the emperor. Then you have Shu, the idealist, in the southwest, whose claim comes from their royal bloodline and whose strength is in strategy. And finally, holding the balance of power in the southeast, you've got Wu the survivor, with their dominant navy and regional control. It's just this perfect storm of different strengths and ambitions that created this incredible, tense, and for a long time unbreakable standoff.
Now, obviously, this stalemate couldn't last forever. Spoiler alert, eventually all three of these kingdoms fall, and China is reunited under a new dynasty, the Jin. But that brings up a really interesting question, right? If they all technically failed in the end, why are we still talking about this story almost 2,000 years later? What makes it so compelling?
Well, a huge part of the answer lies in one of the greatest works of literature ever written, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This epic novel, written way later in the 14th century, took the real historical events and people and just supercharged them, turning them into absolute legends. And its opening line is one of the most famous in all of literature. It perfectly captures this huge, cyclical idea of history that the Three Kingdoms period is all about.
And that's why the story just never gets old. The themes, loyalty, betrayal, ambition, strategy, they're completely universal. Seriously, the dilemmas these leaders faced have become timeless lessons. You see their influence everywhere, from business schools teaching strategy to, yes, tons of modern video games. It's all about the complex choices they had to make.
So that really brings us to the final question, and it's one I want you to think about. If you were in their shoes, with the world crumbling around you and a chance to build something new, which path would you take? Would you be the pragmatist like Cao Cao, driven by ambition? The idealist like Liu Bei, fighting for virtue? Or the survivor like Sun Quan, relying on patience and endurance? It's a question that makes this ancient story feel incredibly relevant.